The sky was pink champagne.
On the evening of July 16, 1989, the peaceful city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, was rocked by a shocking and devastating crime. 18-year-old Kaitlyn Arquette, a bright and promising student, was driving her car alone through the city when she was brutally shot in what would initially be labeled a random act of violence. But for those who knew her, especially her mother, nothing about the murder seemed random. Kaitlyn was the daughter of Lois Duncan, a widely respected author best known for her young adult suspense novels. Her works had captivated readers for decades, but nothing could have prepared her for the real-life nightmare she was about to endure. Kaitlyn had just graduated from high school and was preparing to attend the University of New Mexico that fall. Her life was filled with hope, promise, and plans, all of which were abruptly cut short in a matter of seconds. On that fateful night, Kaitlyn had spent some time with her friend Sharon Smith and was driving through a quiet area near Old Town Albuquerque on her way to another friend's house. While passing through the intersection at Lomas and Arno, a car pulled up beside her. In a sudden, senseless moment, someone fired 2 bullets into Kaitlyn's head. Her car drifted across the road, hit a light pole, and came to a stop. She was still breathing when paramedics arrived and was rushed to the hospital, but she died the following day without regaining consciousness. The Albuquerque Police Department, APD, quickly launched an investigation. Initially, authorities suspected a random drive-by shooting, not uncommon in the area at the time. There appeared to be no clear motive, no sign of robbery, and Kaitlyn wasn't involved in any risky behavior. But her mother, Lois Duncan, refused to accept this version of events. The deeper she looked, the more convinced she became that Kaitlyn had been deliberately targeted, and the more questions began to emerge. At the center of Lois's suspicions was Kaitlyn's ex-boyfriend, Dung Nguyen. He was a 21-year-old Vietnamese immigrant who had been dating Kaitlyn for 3 years. The relationship had recently ended, and according to Kaitlyn's friends, she had begun to fear him and his associates. Dung was part of a group that was allegedly involved in insurance scams and other criminal operations. They staged car accidents and submitted false insurance claims, a scheme that Kaitlyn had apparently discovered. She had reportedly confided in friends that she was afraid of what she had learned, and that she might need to go to the police. Although Dung cooperated with the police and even passed a polygraph test, Lois believed his alibi was shaky. He claimed he had been at a friend's house at the time of the shooting, and this alibi was backed up, but inconsistencies remained. Lois suspected that even if Dung wasn't the shooter, he knew more than he was telling. After the police seemed to settle on the theory of a random shooting, Lois took matters into her own hands. She hired a team of private investigators, including former police officers, to pursue leads the authorities had dismissed or ignored. She also examined Kaitlyn's belongings, her notebooks, letters, and phone records, for clues. What she found deepened her belief that the official version of events was wrong. Kaitlyn had written in her journal cryptic notes about her fear and suspicions regarding Dung and his circle. There were hints that she knew of criminal activity, though the entries didn't spell things out directly. In one entry, she described feeling that she was being watched or followed. Lois found this particularly disturbing in light of how Kaitlyn died. As Lois's investigation continued, she came across Sharon Smith again, the same friend Kaitlyn had visited before her murder. Sharon revealed chilling information. She believed that Dung and his associates were dangerous. Sharon herself had once been romantically linked to one of the men in the group, and warned Lois that these men were ruthless and had a network of criminal contacts. Then came another strange lead. Paul Apodaca. He was one of the first people to arrive at the scene of Kaitlyn's crash and had called 911. At first, this seemed like a stroke of good fortune, a witness who might provide answers. But something about his behavior didn't sit right with Lois or her investigators. Apodaca had a criminal record, including violent offenses and sexual assault. Why was he near the scene just moments after the murder? And why did he seem so calm when he spoke to police? Years later, in 2021, Apodaca would shock the community by confessing to several cold case murders, including at least one from the 1980s. Though he has not been officially charged in Kaitlyn's case, many now believe he may have played a role, either as the killer or someone connected to those responsible. Throughout her efforts, Lois also received numerous anonymous tips. Several people came forward claiming that Kaitlyn had been followed the night of her murder. Some said they saw suspicious vehicles tailing her car. Others alleged that members of Dung's group had openly threatened Kaitlyn. Still others hinted that the Albuquerque Police Department may have mishandled or even deliberately ignored key leads. One particularly disturbing possibility was that Kaitlyn had contacted someone in law enforcement to report what she knew, and that this act, of trying to do the right thing, had sealed her fate. Lois began to believe that Kaitlyn had stumbled upon something far larger than a local fraud ring, a web of organized crime with connections that reached into the police department itself. Despite all the information she gathered, the APD refused to reclassify Kaitlyn's death as anything other than a random shooting. This infuriated Lois. She believed that the police either didn't care or were protecting someone. She accused them of incompetence and corruption, and the media began to take notice. In 1992, Lois published a nonfiction book titled Who Killed My Daughter? The book documented her investigation and became a national bestseller. It brought renewed attention to the case and led to television interviews, documentaries, and crime shows covering Kaitlyn's story. Lois hoped the publicity would force the authorities to reopen the case, but while interest spiked temporarily, no arrests were made. In the years that followed, Lois kept the pressure on. She maintained a website dedicated to Kaitlyn's case and responded to every tip that came in. She even consulted psychics, one of whom gave the name of a man who turned out to have real-world connections to the suspects in question. Though unconventional, some of these psychics' insights matched real evidence that had already been uncovered, further reinforcing Lois's belief that the case was solvable if someone would just listen. Lois Duncan passed away in 2016, after decades of tirelessly pursuing justice for her daughter. She never lived to see Kaitlyn's killer brought to justice. The case officially remains unsolved, despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence suggesting that her death was no random act. To this day, the murder of Kaitlyn Arquette haunts her family, friends, and all who followed the case. Whether she was targeted for what she knew, betrayed by someone close, or silenced by a criminal network, the truth is still buried. But her mother's devotion and relentless search for answers ensured that Kaitlyn would not be forgotten. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged regarding the tragic and unsolved murder of Kaitlyn Arquette. While police quickly labeled it a random drive-by shooting, many, especially her family, have refused to accept that explanation, pointing instead to a more complex and potentially sinister truth. One of the most prominent theories centers around Kaitlyn's ex-boyfriend, Dung Nguyen, and his alleged involvement in an organized insurance fraud ring. According to her mother, author Lois Duncan, Kaitlyn had become aware of Dung's illegal activities and may have threatened to go to the police. Just weeks before her death, she broke up with him and had reportedly expressed fear about the people he associated with. Some of Kaitlyn's friends supported this, saying she had told them she felt she was being watched and followed. There was growing concern that her knowledge of the insurance scams posed a threat to those involved, and that she may have been targeted to prevent her from exposing their operation. The way the murder was carried out further raised suspicion. Kaitlyn was shot twice in the head while driving through a quiet area in Albuquerque. The killer didn't attempt to rob her or confront her in any way. Only 2 precise shots were fired through her car window. This led many to believe the murder was not random at all, but rather a professional hit, staged to look like a senseless act of violence. The shooter vanished without a trace, and there were no similar drive-by incidents reported in that area during the same period. The specificity of the attack, quick, silent, and without apparent motive, suggested to some that it had been carefully planned and executed. Adding to the mystery is the behavior of the Albuquerque Police Department. Lois Duncan believed that the police either mishandled the investigation or deliberately ignored key leads. Witnesses claimed to have seen suspicious vehicles following Kaitlyn days before her death, but those tips were allegedly never followed up. Even more troubling, Kaitlyn may have attempted to report her concerns to someone in law enforcement, If true, and if corruption existed within the department, or if someone tipped off the wrong people, it could explain both her death and the apparent reluctance to pursue promising leads. Duncan openly accused the department of closing the case prematurely and refusing to consider alternative possibilities. A particularly eerie part of the case involves Paul Apodaca, a man with a violent history who was the first person to arrive at the scene of Kaitlyn's crash. He called 911 and stayed with her until paramedics arrived. Years later, Apodaca confessed to multiple murders from the 1980s, though he has not been charged in connection with Kaitlyn's death. Still, his background raised eyebrows. He had a record of sexual assault and had spent time in prison. His presence at the scene so quickly after the shooting struck many as suspicious. Could he have been the killer, lurking nearby and watching Kaitlyn before making his move? Or was he somehow connected to others involved in her murder? Another line of speculation involves the idea that Kaitlyn's death was linked to jealousy or emotional revenge. Her breakup with Dung had reportedly been turbulent, and some believed he was not ready to let go. There were rumors that he wanted to reconcile with her, and his friends may have seen her as a threat or liability, especially if she had knowledge of criminal activity. Whether Dung himself was involved or someone in his social circle acted independently out of loyalty or personal vendetta, the possibility of a revenge-driven motive has never been ruled out. Despite these layered possibilities, the police remained firm in their position that the shooting was simply random. Albuquerque at the time had its share of violent crime, and they believed Kaitlyn had the tragic misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yet, critics of this theory have pointed out the lack of supporting evidence. Kaitlyn had no known enemies, gang affiliations, or risky behaviors. No other shootings like hers occurred in the same area or in similar circumstances. The controlled, almost clinical nature of the attack undermines the notion that it was just an act of random violence. Some believe the truth lies not in one singular theory, but in a combination of several. Perhaps members of the insurance fraud ring did want Kaitlyn silenced, but they enlisted someone else, possibly a violent outsider like Apodaca, to carry out the murder. This would explain why the attack was so precise and left so few clues, and why the investigation yielded nothing despite credible leads. If corruption or fear kept certain people quiet, and if multiple individuals played different roles in orchestrating and covering up the crime, the truth could remain buried for decades. What makes Kaitlyn's case especially haunting is that so many of these theories feel plausible. Whether she was the victim of an organized hit, a vengeful lover, a dangerous criminal, or a broader conspiracy, the available evidence remains inconclusive. Her mother's relentless efforts to seek justice have drawn national attention, yet the case remains open and unsolved. Kaitlyn was a young woman with a bright future, possibly caught between dangerous secrets and a web of people with something to lose.